He spent his last dollar to buy a stranger, not to own her, but to set her free. What happened next changed both their lives forever. Before the world even knows what it's about to take from him, a quiet rancher makes a choice that costs him everything. Before she knows what kindness looks like, a broken woman mistakes mercy for a bargain. And before either of them understands it, two shattered lives collide on the cold edge of the plains, where $1 changes the course of everything. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The northern plains lay under a heavy, breathless stillness that afternoon as wagons creaked across the open yard of the trading post, their wooden wheels groaning against packed dirt. The air carried the thick smell of sweat, horsehide and sun-baked timber, drifting lazily on a sluggish wind that did nothing to ease the heat. Caleb Ward stepped out of the supply shed with a small sack of nails in one hand and a folded paper of salt in the other. His boots pressed into the brittle soil, which crumbled softly beneath each step. He had ridden into town because a restless night wind had knocked his fence line crooked, and he needed nails to mend it before his cattle wandered. He also needed salt to stretch the last of the meat waiting in his cabin pantry. There was no room in his pockets for anything more. He had counted his coins 3 times before riding in, hoping he wouldn't be forced to choose between repairs and food. Caleb was 36, lean from years of work, his skin marked by sunburn that had settled permanently into the lines around his eyes. His dark hair sat unevenly on his head, trimmed in jagged places where he had cut it himself with a pocket knife. He spoke rarely unless it was necessary, losing his younger brother during a cattle drive accident 4 years earlier had quieted him more than anything else ever could. Since then, he lived alone on a small homestead north of the ridge, tending a modest herd and keeping his distance from people whenever he could. He didn't like noise. He didn't like questions. He didn't like eyes lingering on him too long. He preferred places where he could see the horizon without interruption. His plan was simple: buy his supplies and leave before dusk. His horse had a swollen ankle from stepping into a prairie dog hole the day before, and he didn't want to be riding in the dark. But the crowd near the holding pen slowed his steps. Buyers argued loudly, raising dust as they paced around the wooden rails. Caleb tried to pass without looking, but the sound of someone stumbling inside the pen made his head turn despite himself. A small group of Apache captives stood huddled together. Some shifted nervously, others stared at the ground. None of them looked hopeful. One woman stood slightly apart from the rest. Her bare feet rested on cracked boards. Her long black hair hung in tangled strands over her shoulders, and her frayed deerskin dress showed the hard wear of rough travel. The thinness of her frame spoke of weeks without proper food. She kept her eyes lowered, but not in defeat. It was the posture of someone who had learned that attention only brought danger. Something tightened in Caleb's chest at the sight. He recognized that posture. He had seen it on his brother's face during their last night together, when fear had settled into him like a sickness he couldn't shake. Caleb wasn't looking to save anyone. He wasn't even looking to involve himself. His only goal was to get his supplies and go home. Yet his feet stayed planted near the pen. A drunken trader shoved through the crowd, a half-empty bottle swinging loosely from his hand. His eyes were red. His shirt hung open at the chest. He swaggered toward the rails with an unfocused grin. When he spotted the young woman, he muttered something crude and reached through the wooden slats, grabbing her arm without hesitation. She didn't fight. Her muscles went rigid in a way that showed she had learned resistance only made things worse. Heat crawled up the back of Caleb's neck. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but seeing the trader yank her forward dragged an old image out of his memory. His brother being pulled under a collapsed rail during the accident. Helpless, terrified, unable to defend himself, Caleb's pulse thudded hard against his ribs. He stepped closer without meaning to. "Let go of her," he said quietly. The trader turned, confused at first, then irritated. "What for?" he snapped. Caleb didn't raise his voice. "Release her." The man tightened his grip instead, pulling the woman harder, as if to show he didn't take orders from strangers. Her fingers curled inward as she braced her weight to keep from falling. Caleb's jaw locked. He hated how easily anger climbed up his spine in moments like this. It made him feel reckless, and recklessness was what had cost his brother his life. The trader laughed and announced a price, far higher than what she was worth in any trade. It was an amount spoken purely to spite the interference. Caleb's stomach turned. He knew exactly how much money he had left. $1, enough for a small sack of flour or a jar of oil if he rationed carefully. Not enough to last through winter. The trader smirked. "You want her? Pay it." Caleb didn't know what pushed him forward. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch. Maybe it was the way she looked like she expected the ground to hit her again. Maybe it was the memory of his brother's face when he realized no help was coming. Whatever it was, Caleb reached into his pocket and placed his last dollar on the rail. His chest tightened as the coin left his fingers. No food, no margin for repairs. Just a choice he couldn't explain in words. The trader snatched the dollar and shoved the woman toward him with careless force. She stumbled but caught herself, tugging the torn strap of her dress back into place with a quick, practiced motion. Her eyes stayed on the ground. Caleb took off his coat, worn thin and patched at the elbows, and held it out to her. He made sure not to step too close. She hesitated, uncertain of his intention. "It's yours," he said softly. "Wear it." She took the coat gingerly, as if it might vanish or turn into a trick. When she wrapped it around her shoulders, her breath hitched faintly, though she tried to hide it behind lowered lashes. Caleb nodded toward his horse. "We're leaving." She followed, her steps slow from exhaustion. When she reached the saddle, she stopped, waiting, not knowing if she would be pulled, pushed, or lifted. Caleb pointed to the stirrup. "Climb when you're ready." Her fingers trembled as she mounted. He saw it but didn't comment. He placed the nails and salt behind the saddle, swung up, and kept enough space between them so she wouldn't feel trapped. Her shoulders dropped a fraction at the distance he left. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning of something she didn't know how to name. They rode away from town, the trading post fading into a blur of dust and noise behind them. Caleb let the horse move at an easy pace to keep her steady. Her back stayed rigid, and she clutched the coat with one hand. She kept waiting for him to speak, to demand something, to tell her what her new purpose would be. He said nothing. His thoughts churned quietly. What was he supposed to do with her? He didn't have extra food. He didn't have extra blankets. He didn't have the temperament for caretaking. But the thought of leaving her anywhere near that trading post twisted his stomach. After several miles, she shifted slightly from discomfort. Caleb slowed the horse without a word. She glanced at him, startled by the simple act of adjusting pace for her comfort. No one had done that for her in months, maybe years. The ridge of his homestead came into view, a small cabin, a leaning fence, a wide expanse of grass bending under the evening wind. Tension crept into Caleb as they approached. He wasn't used to sharing his space. He wasn't sure he knew how, but he couldn't turn back. "You'll rest there tonight," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but her grip on the coat softened. The sun dipped low as the horse carried them into the first, uncertain stretch of their shared path. The light had nearly faded when Caleb guided the horse toward the small rise where his cabin stood. The wind had cooled, carrying the faint smell of dry grass and old earth. Sonia held the coat tight as they approached the worn structure. She expected shouting, commands, or punishment. Every man she had encountered for months had announced his intentions. Before she even stepped off a horse, Caleb remained silent, which unsettled her more than anger would have. The cabin looked simple, hand-built boards, a stone chimney, a single shutter hanging crooked. To Sonia, it was unfamiliar ground, but at least no voices came from inside. Caleb dismounted first, landing softly on the dirt. He kept one hand on the reins. "Go slow," he said. "You're tired." His tone held no impatience, only observation. She slid off the saddle with stiff legs and steadied herself. Caleb watched long enough to be sure she wouldn't fall, then stepped aside so she could move freely. He unhooked the supplies and pushed the door open. He didn't hurry her. He didn't pressure her to enter. She stood waiting for an order that never came. "You can go in," he said at last. "No one else is here?" Sonia crossed the threshold with guarded steps. The cabin was small, one room only. A bed stood against the far wall, its blanket rough but clean. A wooden table sat beneath the window with two mismatched chairs. A shelf held tin cups, a kettle, and jars of dried beans. Everything had been arranged with careful precision. There was no clutter, no sign of another person living there. The stillness felt heavy but not threatening. Caleb set the nails and salt on the table. He noticed her eyes scanning corners, checking for escape routes. He had seen that look in skittish horses, creatures who didn't yet believe the danger was gone. "I'll start the stove," he said, giving her space. He crouched, struck a match, and fed the flame into dry kindling. The fire caught, sending a soft glow across the room. Sonia didn't move. She stood with her back to the wall, hands gripping the coat collar. She didn't understand why he hadn't tied her hands or blocked the door. Men who traded women never trusted them to stand freely. Caleb removed his hat and hung it on a hook. "You can sit if you want," he said, "or stay standing, whatever feels better." She watched his posture. Slightly stooped, shoulders drawn in. Not aggressive, just worn. His silence was different from the silence she'd known among captors. Their silence had been a threat waiting to break. His felt like habit, something carried for years because speaking offered nothing. He filled a pot with water and set it to warm. "You'll eat soon," he said without turning. Sonia shifted her weight. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but she didn't trust the offer. She had been fed before, only to be demanded payment afterward. She waited for the rest of the sentence that never came. Caleb ladled beans into the pot. The scent rose slowly. Her hands trembled when the smell reached her, but she kept her face still. Showing need had been dangerous before. He placed a bowl on the table. "Food's almost ready." He didn't look at her. He didn't coax her forward. He simply prepared the meal, as if feeding another person were ordinary. She stepped closer at last, her feet dragging. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. When he filled the bowl and set a spoon beside it, he took 3 steps back and sat near the window, hands on his knees so she could see them. "Eat what you can," he said. Sonia lowered herself onto the chair opposite him. She took tiny bites, watching him between each one. He stared out the window at the darkening plains. His jaw tightened occasionally, not with anger, but with the tension of someone who always expected things to collapse. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Where do I sleep?" she asked, her voice raw. Caleb pointed to the corner near a crate of folded blankets. "There if you want." He lay back on his bed, one arm over his forehead. "Door stays unlocked. You can leave if you choose." The words hit her strangely. Choice was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Leaving was impossible, but the fact he offered it disarmed her more than any threat. She took a blanket and rested on the floor. The boards were firm but not cold. She curled beneath it, fingers gripping the edge. For the first time in months, no one demanded anything after nightfall. No orders came. No footsteps approached. Caleb's breathing stayed even. Sonia's eyes slowly closed, torn between exhaustion and suspicion. The cabin held 2 people who didn't know what to make of each other, both understanding how fragile morning would be. Light slipped in slowly the next day. Sonia awoke before Caleb. The night had been the first in months without hands grabbing her, awake or voices barking orders. The silence felt almost deceptive. Caleb lay on his back, breathing steady, exhaustion heavy in his bones. He didn't look threatening. He looked worn out. Sonia folded her blanket and stood near the wall, unsure if she should move. Caleb finally opened his eyes. "You don't have to stand there," he said. "You're not in trouble." He went outside to draw water. She watched him from the window. He returned with a bucket. "You can wash up. Water's clean." She dipped her hands, wiped her face. He heated beans and oats. "Eat as much as you want. There's no limit here." She hesitated, then ate. "Why am I here?" she asked. "Because leaving you there didn't sit right with me," he answered. That was all. He stepped outside again. "You can walk around if you want. The land's open." She tested the dirt beneath her feet. Freedom without direction felt like being suspended in air. Caleb checked his horse's leg. "You don't have chores unless you want them," he said. "No one's expecting anything out of you here." The words had weight. She swept the floor anyway. He nodded once. "Thank you." He handed her warm water. "You can tell me if you want something," he said. "If you want to stay quiet, and that's fine too." "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "That's allowed," he replied. The morning passed slowly, no demands, no punishments. By noon, a cautious rhythm formed between them. Two strangers learning how to breathe again. By late afternoon, the wind sharpened. Dark clouds pressed low. Caleb watched the sky. Sonia stepped out after him. Storms had never meant safety to her. "It'll rain hard," he said. "Not long, but strong." He checked shutters. Sonia tended the stove. Thunder rolled. Rain struck the roof. She flinched. He made her a warm drink. "You're safe here," he said. "Storms brought trouble before," she whispered. "Not this one," he replied. She sat on the bed's edge. The storm strengthened. He spoke quietly. "You don't have to tell me anything, but you can. I thought the storm last month would kill me," she whispered. "I'm sorry you lived that," he said. "You're not like them," she said. "I don't want to be." The wind softened. The rain slowed. "You handled it," he said. The words landed deep. Inside the cabin, a silence settled that felt warmer than before. Evening came. Sonia cooked. Caleb ate. She finally said, "When you paid that $1, I thought you wanted ownership." "That's not what I wanted," he said. "Women like me repay men with bodies or children," she said. "I owe you a future." "You don't owe me a child," he said firmly. "Not now." "Not ever. Then what am I to you?" she asked. "Someone who didn't deserve what happened. Someone who gets to decide her own life. If I stay, you won't expect that from me." "No, then take your time," he said. The moment reshaped something between them. Sonia didn't offer herself again. Caleb didn't expect her to. The next days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. He worked. She watched. Then she helped. She cooked because she wanted to. She handed him nails. "You're getting strong again," he said. "Strong is safe here." She mended her dress. "I hear no danger," she said. "Not out here," he replied. They shared quiet. He spoke of his brother. "You lived," she said. "That is not nothing." Frost came. Then hints of spring. They stood on the ridge. "I've been thinking about staying," she said. "Not because I owe you anything. You don't have to decide." "All at once," he said. "I'm not afraid of choosing," she replied. They prepared soil together. "You can teach me," he said. She smiled for the first time. "I want to make something grow. Here, we can plant whatever you want. I'm staying," she said. "Then this is your home too," he replied. She placed her hand over his. Two lives, no longer bound by fear, standing on land that finally felt like a beginning. Spring arrived slowly on the plains, not with a burst of color, but with small, careful signs that only someone who lived close to the land would notice. The frost thinned at the edges of the creek. The soil softened just enough to take a blade of grass. Birds returned in quiet pairs, testing the air before committing to the season. For Caleb and Sonia, those changes felt heavier than any storm. They weren't just watching the land wake up. They were learning how to live inside a peace neither of them fully trusted yet. Sonia woke before dawn most mornings now, not because she was afraid someone would come for her, but because her body had grown used to being alert. She would step outside, wrapped in Caleb's patched coat, breathing in the cool air, letting her eyes travel across the open stretch of grass that belonged to no one but them. The first time she realized she hadn't checked the horizon for danger in several minutes. It startled her more than any nightmare ever had. Caleb noticed the change too. She moved differently now. Her shoulders didn't stay hunched. Her steps were lighter, less careful. She laughed once when a stubborn chicken escaped the pen and made him chase it in a clumsy circle. The sound of that laugh stayed with him all day, replaying in his mind while he repaired fence posts. It felt dangerous to enjoy something so simple. He had lost too much already to trust good things. They worked side by side without needing many words. Sonia learned how to mend harness straps, how to sort beans, how to keep the stove burning evenly. Caleb learned which silences meant she was tired and which ones meant she was thinking about something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Some evenings they sat on the porch steps, watching the sky darken into deep blue, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but not quite. Neither of them rushed the space between. One afternoon, as they were planting the first rows of vegetables, Sonia suddenly froze. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the hoe. Caleb saw her eyes lock onto something in the distance. "What is it?" he asked gently. Dust rose along the far ridge. A wagon, 2 riders. Her breathing went shallow. "They came like that before," she whispered. "Quiet at first." Then shouting. Then she stopped herself, but her hands were shaking. Caleb stepped in front of her without thinking, not aggressively, just enough to block her view. "You're not there anymore," he said. "No one has a claim on you here." The wagon passed on a distant trail, never turning toward the homestead. When it was gone, Sonia sank onto the ground, covering her face. Caleb crouched a few feet away, not touching her, not crowding her. "You don't have to be brave here," he said. "You already survived the part that mattered." That night, Sonia couldn't sleep. Memories pressed in, sharp and unwanted. She finally sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Caleb noticed her movement and stirred. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "I don't know how to be what you think I am." He sat up slowly. "What do you think you are?" "Grateful, quiet, easy." Her voice cracked. "Not broken?" He rubbed his face, searching for words. "I don't want easy," he said. "I don't want quiet. I want real. You don't have to perform anything for me." She stared at him in the dim light. "Why didn't you ask for anything back?" "Because buying a person isn't saving them," he said. "And I didn't want to be another man who decided what your life should cost." Tears slid down her cheeks. Not loud ones, just a steady, aching release. Caleb moved closer, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "I don't know how to love without paying for it," she whispered. "You don't have to love me at all," he said. "You just have to exist here. That's enough." Something shifted in her chest then, a heavy knot loosening. She leaned her head against his shoulder just for a moment. He went still, barely breathing, afraid to break whatever fragile trust had formed. From that night on, the space between them changed. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a slow, almost awkward warmth that crept into their routines. Sonia started waiting for Caleb to come back from the fields, just to tell him small things. That a bird had nested near the window, that the bread rose better today, that the creek sounded different after the rain. Caleb found himself lingering near her when she worked, inventing reasons to stay close without admitting why. One evening, while they were fixing a broken fence rail together, Sonia slipped and would have fallen if Caleb hadn't grabbed her arm. The contact was brief, instinctive, but neither of them pulled away right away. "Sorry," he said. "It's okay," she replied. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, heavy and quiet. Caleb released her gently. That night, Sonia lay awake again, but this time not from fear. From something else entirely. Days turned into weeks. The garden began to sprout. The air grew warmer. Life felt almost ordinary, and that scared both of them more than hardship ever had. Then trouble finally came. A group of men rode up just before dusk. Dust-covered and sharp-eyed traders, the same kind that passed through the post. One of them dismounted and looked over the fence line with a slow, calculating gaze. "We heard you had an Apache woman here," he said casually. "She's property. Belongs to a man who paid good money for her." Sonia stood frozen in the doorway. The world tilted. Her past had found her again. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between her and the men. "She's not property," he said evenly. "She's free." The trader laughed. "Not how it works. You paid $1 for her. That doesn't mean ownership transfers. That means you interfered." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. He felt the old fear rise, the one that whispered he would lose everything again. But this time, it wasn't just his life on the line. "She stays," he said. "You can leave." The man's eyes hardened. "You don't have the law on your side." "Neither do you," Caleb replied. "You try to take her, and you'll have a problem you don't want." The men exchanged looks. They were armed. He was alone, but something in Caleb's posture made them hesitate. Not rage, not bluff, resolve. Sonia stepped out beside him, her voice shaking but clear. "I choose to stay here." The trader scoffed. "Your choice doesn't matter." "It does now," Caleb said. After a tense pause, the men backed off, muttering threats about returning with legal papers. They rode away into the fading light. Sonia collapsed against Caleb, her legs giving out. He caught her, holding her up for the first time without fear of crossing a line. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "You're not facing them alone anymore." That night, Sonia couldn't stop shaking. Caleb made tea, wrapped her in blankets, sat beside her until her breathing slowed. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You could have sent me away to keep your life simple." "I don't want simple," he said quietly. "I want you safe." She looked at him then with a new kind of clarity. "Why me?" he swallowed. "Because losing my brother taught me something. You don't wait to protect what matters. You just do it, even if it ruins you." Silence filled the room. "Caleb," she said softly, "I think I love you, and that terrifies me." His heart pounded. "You don't have to say that," he said. "I want to," she replied. "Not because I owe you, not because I'm scared. Because you never made me pay for being human." He reached for her hand, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. "I love you too," he said. "Not as a debt, as a choice." They didn't rush into anything physical that night. They just held hands, sitting close, listening to the quiet land outside, both aware that their fragile peace might not last. But for the first time, they weren't just surviving together. They were choosing each other. The men did come back. Not the next day, not even the next week. Them wore a stiff jacket and carried a folded document tucked under his arm. Another had a rifle slung openly across his saddle. The trader who had threatened them before dismounted first. His smile was thinner now, colder. "Told you we'd be back," he said. "We brought papers this time. Legal claim." Caleb didn't move. "Let's see them." The man unfolded the document and held it up just far enough to keep Caleb from grabbing it. "She was purchased legally. Your interference was unlawful. You owe compensation and the woman." Sonia stepped out onto the porch despite herself. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I wasn't purchased. I was stolen." The man sneered. "Not how the courts will see it." Caleb took a slow breath. "You don't have any authority here. This land isn't under your post's jurisdiction." One of the riders laughed. "You think a nobody rancher can fight 4 men and a court?" Caleb felt the familiar fear claw at his chest, the same helplessness he'd felt the night his brother died. But this time, something else rose with it. Not panic, not rage. Resolve. "You can take this to court if you want," he said. "You won't win. You have no proof of a lawful sale. No witnesses, no transport records. And if you touch her, I'll put a bullet in whoever does it first. Then we can all explain ourselves to the judge." There was a long, dangerous silence. Sonia watched him, stunned. She had never seen him like this. He wasn't loud. He wasn't threatening. He was immovable. The man with the papers hesitated. "You'd really risk your life for her?" Caleb didn't look at Sonia when he answered. "I already have." The men exchanged glances again. They hadn't expected resistance this strong, this prepared. Finally, the trader spat into the dirt. "This isn't over." "It is here," Caleb said. "Get off my land." They left, not defeated, but not victorious either. Sonia collapsed onto the porch steps the moment they were gone. Caleb sat beside her, his hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They could have killed you." "I know," he said. "I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't." She pressed her forehead into his shoulder. "I don't deserve this." "You deserve more than this," he replied. The threat didn't fade. For weeks afterward, every sound of hooves made Sonia flinch. Every distant voice made her heart race. She barely slept. She barely ate. Caleb watched her unravel and hated himself for not being able to fix it. One night, she sat at the table, staring into her untouched bowl of stew. "I can't keep living like this," she said, "waiting for them to come back, waiting for everything to be taken again." Caleb swallowed. "What are you saying?" "I think I should leave," she said. "If I'm not here, they won't have a reason to hurt you." The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. "No," he said immediately. "That's not your responsibility." "It is if they kill you," she said. "I couldn't survive that." "Not after everything." He stood and paced, running his hands through his hair. "You think sending yourself back into danger is protecting me? That's not protection. That's punishment." "They won't stop," she whispered. "Then we won't either," he said. "We'll go to the territorial court ourselves. We'll make it official. We'll force this into the light where they can't bully you in the dark." Her eyes widened. They won't believe me. They will, he said, because I'll stand beside you and tell them everything. Because there are missionaries in the next county who will back you. Because those men don't have clean hands and they know it. She stared at him for a long moment. You're really not letting me go, are you? No, he said softly. I'm not. The journey to town was harder than either of them expected. Sonia hadn't ridden into a settlement willingly since the day she'd been taken. Every building felt like a trap. Every man felt like a threat. Caleb never left her side. He spoke for her when her voice failed. He held her hand when her knees weakened. He stood between her and anyone who stared too long. The territorial judge was an older man with tired eyes. He listened quietly as Caleb laid out everything. The $1 exchange, the trader's threats, the repeated harassment, Sonia's captivity. When Sonia finally spoke, her voice shook at first, but it didn't break. I was taken from my people, she said. Sold and traded, beaten when I refused. I never agreed to belong to anyone. I choose to live with Caleb Ward. I choose to be free. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back. Do you have proof she was lawfully purchased? He asked the traders, who had come to challenge the claim. They didn't. They had papers, but no origin records. No witnesses. No chain of sale. The judge ruled in Sonia's favor. She was declared a free woman. The traders were fined for unlawful detention and barred from approaching the homestead. When the gavel fell, Sonia burst into tears. Caleb held her so tightly his arm shook. It's over, he whispered. They can't touch you anymore. For the first time in her life, she believed it. Freedom didn't fix everything. Sonia still woke from nightmares, still flinched when men raised their voices, still felt undeserving of joy. But now, when the fear came, she wasn't alone with it. Caleb built her a small garden of her own beside the cabin. This is yours, he said. You decide what grows here. She planted herbs first, then flowers, then vegetables, watching something live because of her hands, healed something inside her that had been broken for years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft gold, Sonia stood in the garden wiping dirt from her palms. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. Regret what? Spending your last dollar on me? Almost dying for me? Ruining your quiet life? Caleb stepped closer. I didn't ruin my life, he said. I found it. She looked at him, her eyes shining. I want to marry you. He blinked. You don't have to. I know, she said, smiling softly. That's why I want to. They were married a month later. No preacher, no crowd. Just the two of them standing under the open sky, promising each other a future neither of them had ever been allowed to imagine before. The years that followed were not easy. There were droughts. There were bad harvests. There were days when Caleb's grief for his brother came back like a storm, and days when Sonia's past still reached for her in the dark. But there were also mornings filled with laughter. There were evenings spent dancing clumsily in the kitchen. There were quiet nights where they lay side by side, holding hands, grateful for the simple miracle of peace. 3 years later, Sonia told Caleb she was pregnant. He cried harder than he had at their wedding. I didn't think I was allowed to have this, she whispered. You always were, he said. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, her cries loud and strong. They named her Hope, not because life had become perfect, but because they had learned something better than perfection. They had learned that mercy, freely given, can change the entire direction of a life, and that love, when it is chosen instead of owed, is the strongest freedom of all. 10 years passed more quietly than either of them had ever believed possible. The land changed first. What had once been a rough, half-tamed stretch of prairie slowly transformed into something that looked unmistakably like a home meant to last generations. The fence line stood straight and strong now, reinforced with new posts cut by Caleb's own hands and set deep into the soil. The barn had been expanded, its roof repaired with clean timber instead of patched boards. The garden Sonia had planted years ago no longer looked small or fragile. It had grown into a thick, thriving spread of herbs, vegetables, and flowers that bloomed in bright defiance of the hard plains. But the bigger change was inside the cabin. Laughter lived there now, not the cautious, uncertain kind that Sonia had first learned to let herself make. Not the brief, Startled kind Caleb had allowed himself when joy felt too dangerous to trust. This laughter was full and easy. It belonged to a little girl with dark hair and curious eyes who ran barefoot across the porch and asked far too many questions about everything she saw. Hope was 8 years old. She had Sonia's eyes and Caleb's stubborn determination. She loved the chickens, followed Caleb into the fields every chance she got, and insisted on helping. Sonia in the kitchen, even when she mostly just made flour explode across the table. That morning, she burst into the cabin holding a crooked bouquet of wildflowers. "For you, Mama," she announced proudly. Sonia knelt and accepted them like they were the most precious gift in the world. "They're beautiful," she said, kissing Hope's forehead. "Just like you." Hope beamed and ran back outside. Caleb watched from the doorway, his arms folded loosely over his chest. "You spoil her," he said. Sonia smiled at him. "You do too. You just pretend not to." He didn't argue. Not everything in their life had been gentle. There had been years when the crops failed and they had to ration food again. Years when sickness took down half the cattle and they barely scraped by. Winters when the wind screamed so hard it felt like it might rip the roof off and carry their whole life away. And there had been nights when Sonia woke shaking, her past clawing its way back into her dreams like it never fully accepted that she had escaped. On those nights, Caleb never asked questions. He just held her. Sometimes she cried into his chest. Sometimes she went silent and stared at the wall. Sometimes she pushed him away because touch felt wrong in those moments. He stayed anyway. He always stayed. One evening, after Hope had finally fallen asleep, curled up with a book on her chest, Sonia sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her hands together. "They're getting worse again," she admitted quietly. Caleb set aside the tool he had been repairing. "The dreams?" She nodded. "I thought I was past it. I thought freedom fixed it." "Freedom doesn't erase scars," he said gently. "It just makes them hurt less." "I don't want Hope to see me like this," she whispered. "I don't want her to think her mother is weak." Caleb took her hands in his. "You're the strongest person I know," he said. "You survived things that would have broken most people. And you still chose kindness. You still chose life. That's what she'll learn from you." Sonia leaned into him, her eyes closing. For the first time in years, she let herself believe him completely. The outside world hadn't stayed frozen in time either. Settlements had grown. Roads had been carved through the plains. More families had moved into the region, bringing noise, trade, and new laws. One afternoon, a stranger rode up to the homestead. He introduced himself as a government agent sent to formally register land claims and census records. When he asked Sonia for her background, her hands tightened. "I don't have papers," she said carefully. The man glanced at his clipboard. "That may be a problem." Caleb stepped forward. "She's a free citizen," he said firmly. "Declared by the territorial court years ago." The agent hesitated. "That ruling might not hold under the new federal statutes." Sonia felt the old fear slam into her chest like a hammer. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "If anyone tries to challenge her status, I'll take it all the way to the capital if I have to. And every missionary, judge, and farmer in 3 counties will testify that she is my wife, the mother of my child, and a lawful resident of this land." The agent studied his face for a long moment. Then he slowly nodded. "I'll note her as a lawful resident by marriage." When he rode away, Sonia's knees nearly gave out. Caleb wrapped an arm around her. "No one's taking you anywhere," he said. "Not now. Not ever." Hope grew into a thoughtful, fiercely curious child. She asked Sonia once, when she was 9, "Why don't we live near other people?" Sonia hesitated. "Because this land helped your father and me heal." "From what?" Caleb answered before Sonia could. "From lives that didn't feel like our own." Hope thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "I like our life. It feels big and quiet at the same time." Sonia smiled. They hadn't told Hope the full truth about Sonia's past. Not yet, but Sonia knew that day would come, and it terrified her. That day came sooner than she expected. Hope was 11 when she overheard 2 men in town whispering. "That's the Indian woman who was bought for $1, one of them muttered. Hope went home pale and silent. That night, She stood in the doorway of her parents' room. "Mama," she said softly, "did someone buy you?" Sonia's heart shattered. Caleb closed his eyes just for a second. Sonia sat up and opened her arms. "Come here," she said. Hope crawled into the bed between them. Sonia took a deep breath. "A long time ago, bad men tried to own me," she said. "They hurt me. They sold me. They said I wasn't allowed to choose my life." Hope's eyes filled with tears. "But you're not owned now." "No," Sonia said firmly, "because your father didn't buy me to own me. He paid to stop someone else from hurting me. Then he gave me my life back." Hope turned to Caleb. "Is that true?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Your mother chose to stay. I never made her." Hope wrapped her arms around Sonia's neck. "I'm glad you chose us." Sonia broke down then, sobbing into her daughter's hair. That night, a weight she had carried for decades finally began to lift. Years later, when Hope was 16, a young man from a neighboring farm started finding excuses to ride past their land. Caleb watched him with narrowed eyes. "He's not good enough for her," he muttered. Sonia laughed. "You were a quiet, awkward man who lived alone in a cabin when I met you." "That's different," Caleb said. Hope caught them whispering and rolled her eyes. "I'm not getting married," she said. "I'm leaving to become a teacher." Sonia felt a mix of pride and fear. "Leaving where?" "To the town schoolhouse," Hope said. "Girls should be allowed to learn everything boys learn." Caleb stared at her like he was seeing the future for the first time. "You'll come back, right?" he asked. "Always," Hope said. "This is home." When Sonia turned 50, Caleb surprised her with a small carved box. Inside, it was the dollar coin he had paid for her all those years ago. "I kept it," he said, "to remind myself what mercy costs and what it's worth." Sonia held it in her palm, tears spilling freely. "That coin didn't buy me," she said. "It freed me. And it gave me my life too," he replied. They sat together on the porch that evening, older now, slower but more solid than ever. "You know," Sonia said quietly, "I used to think my story ended the day you found me in that pen." Caleb squeezed her hand. "It didn't end. It finally started." On a spring morning decades later, Caleb died peacefully in his sleep. Sonia held his hand until it went cold. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Hope buried him under the cottonwood tree he had planted the year she was born. Sonia lived another 7 years after that. She spent her days in the garden, teaching children from nearby farms how to grow food, how to read, how to believe they were allowed to choose their lives. When she died, Hope placed the carved box with the dollar coin beside her. Long after they were gone, people still told their story, not as a tale about a man who bought a woman, but as a story about two broken people who refused to let cruelty define the rest of their lives, but a single act of mercy that grew into a family, into a home, into a legacy of freedom.